Winter had a strange way of talking to me, almost like it carried the voices of everyone who had ever lived on this land. Most folks in Snow Ridge Heights believed winter made everything silent, peaceful, soft. But for me, silence was never real. The cold groaned, the wind whispered, the ice cracked like old bones remembering old stories, and Hollow Pine Lake, my lakeaway, spoke the loudest. This place wasn't just a frozen puddle in the middle of a pretty suburban neighborhood. It was the last remaining piece of my family history, wrapped in white snow and blue shadows, stretching wider than any of the new folks could understand. My grandparents carved their home here long before the word HOA existed. Back then it was just neighbors and land and respect. Today it was rules, threats, and people trying to own something they didn't even understand. I'd been fishing the same circular hole since I was 12 years old. Same spot, same coat, same rhythm of lowering the line, feeling the cold bite my fingertips, and listening for that soft tug at the other end. The kind that told me something alive was moving under all that ice. My father taught me that. His father taught him. 3 generations of men standing right here, trusting the lake to tell us when it was safe and when it wasn't. Then came Snow Ridge Heights. Over the past few years, new families moved in, a wave of smiling faces with expensive cars, high-powered drones, and an obsession with improving community aesthetics. They renamed the area. They repaved the walkways. They posted community guidelines everywhere like commandments carved into marble. But the worst change wasn't the sidewalks or the mailboxes, it was the attitude. They acted like because they had money, they had ownership even of things they didn't own, especially my lake. It started small, kayakers drifting too close in summer, kids wandering across my dock in fall, people assuming the lake was public just because they could see it from their backyard decks. Then one day, someone installed a shiny metal bench on the shore, my shore. No permission, no apology, no thought, just an assumption. But the biggest storm came 3 winters ago, with the arrival of Karen Monroe. Karen was the kind of person who could disguise a threat as a compliment. She wore her smile like a uniform and her authority like a crown. Within months, she was HOA president, and after that, well, she started expanding her power like it was a hobby. Rules, fines, inspections, none of it bothered me until she set her eyes on the lake. I still remember the morning it began. Snow fell in soft spirals, catching on my coat like tiny crystals. I had just poured steaming coffee into my thermos when I saw 2 figures walking toward me across the ice. One wore a reflective HOA vest like he was some kind of winter law enforcement. The other clutched a clipboard so tightly her glove squeaked. That man introduced himself as Robert. The woman didn't bother giving her name. She simply said, "We're performing a community usage audit. The board is concerned about safety. We ask that you stop ice fishing until our assessment is complete." I stared at them. I own this lake. The woman smiled the way people smile at confused toddlers. "We'll be reviewing that." And then they left. No explanation, no respect, just a slow retreat across the frozen surface like they had already won some silent battle. That night I sifted through every survey, deed, photo, and map stored in my attic. My parents kept everything, receipts from local timber mills, old hunting licenses, family letters, and of course the property documents. I read each page by lamplight while snow hissed against the cabin windows. Hollow Pine Lake was mine, who had always been mine. 30 feet of shoreline cushioned the entire lake like an unbroken ring of family territory. But facts, Dan, scare people who think they're entitled. 2 weeks later, a bright yellow notice was slipped under my door. Unauthorized use of community water feature. The arrogance of that phrase almost made me laugh. Water feature. As if my lake, my memories, my father's legacy was some decorative fountain in front of a mall. I walked outside, looked at the wide frozen expanse softly glowing under morning light, and crumpled the notice in my hand. The next day, I took a folder full of documents to the HOA Dropbox. I included copies of deed surveys, aerial photos from 1970, even a picture of my grandfather standing in front of the lake holding a freshly caught trout. My note was short: "This lake is private. Stop trespassing." But nothing stopped them. Not the maps, not the facts, not the truth. A week later I woke up to the sound of hammering. Workers were driving neon orange HOA ice hazard zone. No fishing signs right into the snow along my private shoreline. I marched straight over. "This is private property," I snapped. They shrugged. "We're just following orders." That evening I attended the HOA meeting, my first time stepping foot into their over-decorated community center. The room smelled like lavender and disinfectant, and the walls were plastered with positivity posters and framed bylaws. Karen Monroe sat at the head of a long table, hands folded neatly, eyebrows raised high with rehearsed authority. When my turn came, I explained every detail, the deed, the history, the boundaries. I placed the folder in front of her. Karen skimmed the pages for less than 5 seconds before sliding them aside. "With all due respect, Mr. Mikadler," she said, "the board has voted to consider the lake part of the community's sphere of influence." Sphere of influence. Like they were some kind of empire. I left without a word, my jaw so tight it hurt. The next morning I drilled into the ice and sat with my fishing rod, 3 hours later, the sheriff pulled up on a snowmobile. He didn't arrest me, didn't even issue a warning. He just said, "The HOA keeps calling. Maybe stay inside for a few days." I didn't. Instead, I watched the situation get worse. Volunteers walked onto my land, measuring things that didn't belong to them. A teenager with a drone hovered above my head like a spy satellite. Someone even photographed the inside of my tool shed through the window. Every time I asked what they were doing, they gave the same response. Karen wanted documentation. It became a battle cry. Then came the final insult, the Winter Glow Festival. An event so big it needed permits, insurance, safety planning, none of which they bothered to file because they assumed they owned the lake. They ordered bleachers, rented speakers, hired a DJ, and marked out vendor spots right on my shoreline. All on private property. That was the final straw. I called an old friend who worked at the state environmental office. I told him everything. He let out a long whistle. "They're staging a public event on private frozen water," he said. "Without permits." "Yep, collect evidence," he said. "A lot of it." Lucky for him, I already had an entire binder labeled HOA nonsense. 2 days later, after studying every angle of the situation, my attorney filed a full injunction. Legal, stamped, irrefutable. So the next morning, I walked onto the ice with a handmade sign. "Private property trespassers prosecuted. Owner on site armed with PAPRWRK." And then I sat in my chair, sipping coffee as their drone hovered above like an angry insect. I raised my mug in a silent toast. Let them film me. Let them stare. Let them gossip. Winter wasn't theirs. The lake wasn't theirs. This land wasn't theirs. And as the first pieces of their DJ booth scraped across the ice, they had no idea that every move they made was already frozen in legal motion. The morning after I posted my bold little owner on site sign, I woke up to the groan of ice shifting beneath the cabin like a giant exhaling. It was the kind of sound anyone else might find eerie, but to me it was familiar, almost comforting. I stepped out onto the porch with steaming coffee, pulled my coat close, and watched sunlight flicker off the crusted snow. The whole lake shimmered like a sheet of hammered silver. For a few seconds, I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind me. But false peace never lasts long in Snow Ridge Heights. Down the slope, 3 silhouettes trudged across the ice toward my fishing spot, one tall, carrying a stack of boards, one short and round, balancing a toolbox, and between them, unmistakable even from a distance, was the frostbitten queen of the HOA herself, Karen Monroe. Even before they got close, I could hear the authority dripping off her voice. "Good morning, Mr. McCadler," she called out, as if we were good neighbors sharing pie recipes. Her boots clacked deliberately on the frozen lake. Behind her, the 2 workers, HOA volunteers who behaved more like unpaid minions, dragged equipment with stiff, jerky movements. They looked embarrassed to be there, but no one wanted to be on Karen's bad side. Her punishments came in the form of fines, notices, neighborhood shaming, and very pointed gossip. I climbed down the porch, walked across the crusting snow, and met them halfway to my fishing hole. "Whatever you're planning," I said, "the answer is still no." Karen flashed a brittle smile, the kind that doesn't even attempt to reach the eyes. "We're not here to discuss property," she chirped. "We're here for safety." She reached into her coat and pulled out a laminated poster. "Community Winter Regulations," it read, with subheadings like ice thickness monitoring, public access zones, and hazard markers. "The lake isn't public," I reminded her. "That's one interpretation," she replied lightly, tapping the paper with her mittened finger. "However, I've spoken to our planning consultant, and we believe firmly that Hollow Pine Lake constitutes a shared environmental asset." "Asset to whom?" I snapped. "The community," she answered sweetly, gesturing vaguely toward the distant cluster of identical houses the developers had dropped on the ridge like plastic toys. I breathed slowly, resisting the urge to tell her exactly where she could shove her laminated poster. Karen nodded to her volunteers. "We'll be installing temporary boundary markers for the weekend festival." I stepped directly into her path. "No, you won't," she stopped, face tightening slightly. "We're well within our rights," she said. "You're standing on my lake." "Our lake," she corrected. "No," I repeated, calmly but firmly. "Mine." Her smile turned razor-sharp. "We'll let the county decide." Later that afternoon, I hauled my shanty across the ice to a new spot just to annoy her. The wind was sharp, slicing across my cheeks as I dragged the wooden shelter inch by inch. Every few steps I paused to listen. Another habit my father taught me. You never ignore the sounds of ice. It speaks, sometimes it warns. But today, the ice wasn't complaining. It was steady, thick, strong, carrying the weight of one stubborn old man and his even more stubborn memories. Inside the shanty, I lit my small propane heater, cracked open the fishing hole, dropped my line, and let my mind untangle itself. The silence was good, honest, until a WASN single quotes T. Around dusk. I noticed movement out the frosted window, small shadows darting around the edge of my property. Flashlights flickered, voices hushed, then a loud thunk echoed across the lake. I stepped out of the shanty, breath turning to steam. On the far side of the shoreline, 4 teenagers HOA kids were hammering colorful stakes into the snow. One of them wore a hoodie with the HOA logo like a badge of allegiance. "What are you doing?" I shouted. They froze like deer. A tall boy with shaggy hair lifted one hand sheepishly. "Mrs. Monroe asked us to mark the ice safety zones. There is no HOA authority on this lake," I said firmly. "Sorry, sir," another boy muttered. We get volunteer credit for school if we help." There it was. Karen bribed them with academic brownie points. "You're trespassing," I said. We didn't know," the tall boy stammered. I exhaled slowly. "Pull them out now." The kids exchanged glances, then hesitantly obeyed. As they tugged the stakes free, I noticed a large SUV idling on the ridge. Its headlights cast long beams across the frozen surface. Karen was watching. Of course she was. That night, I heated canned soup, sat by the small fire in my cabin, and sifted again through my folder of land records. The pages were soft at the edges from years of handling. Handwritten deeds from 1937, county surveys, old photographs where my grandfather stood knee-deep in summer water, pointing proudly to the shoreline. Nothing in those records had changed. The world around them had. The HOA's map, cartoonish, had conveniently erased my land boundaries, replacing them with community lake zona. They had even added little icons, skating figures, snowflakes, a cocoa stand, as if pretty drawings could rewrite legal history. I poured myself one finger of whiskey and stared at the wood stove. The fire crackled, throwing orange light across Marianne's picture on the wall. She smiled, her eyes warm and soft. Losing her had felt like losing the rest of the world to accept this lake. The lake kept her voice alive in the wind, her memory alive in the quiet, her warmth alive inside the cold. I whispered, "They're not taking it." The next morning, everything escalated by sunrise. The HOA had transformed the ridge above my lake into a construction zone. Trucks rumbled across the snow-packed lane. A crane lifted metal frames for a temporary stage. Workers, wearing reflective vests with board approved on the back, hammered nails into plywood platforms. The DJ booth was a centerpiece, gaudy, oversized, and completely out of place. Neon tubes wrapped around its edges like a carnival ride. A banner flapped in the wind. Snow Ridge Winter Bash. I trudged across the ice, jaw clenched. The lake groaned under my boots, not in danger, but in irritation. Like it shared my frustration. "You people don't give up, do you?" I muttered as I approached the cluster of workers. One of them looked up, startled. "We're just doing what the HOA contracted us for." "On private land?" He hesitated. "They showed us paperwork." "Fake paperwork," I said. The man swallowed hard, but kept working. They always did. HOA fear ran deep. Just then, Karen strutted toward me, wrapped in a fur-trimmed parka like she was attending the Winter Olympics. "Good morning, Mr. Mickadler," she purred. "Isn't it exciting? The whole community will finally enjoy the lake properly." "Properly," I repeated. "You mean illegally?" She brushed invisible snow off her coat. "Oh, stop with the dramatics. The community needs this. We all voted." "I didn't." "Not part of the community. My property literally surrounds this lake." "Technicalities," she said with a dismissive wave. I felt my blood heat despite the cold. "You are trespassing." "We have legal grounds," she insisted. "No, you have arrogance." Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're being unreasonable. You could share the lake. You could allow the community some joy. But instead, you're choosing conflict. And you're choosing theft." She smiled. "We'll let the county settle it." "They will," I said. "Tomorrow morning." Confusion flickered in her eyes. "What does that mean?" I simply turned and walked back to my cabin, because what she didn't know was that the injunction had already been reviewed, and the inspector was coming in the morning. That night the temperature dropped sharply. Wind slashed across the lake, carrying fine needles of snow that cut at exposed skin. Inside my cabin, I stoked the fire, double-checked my paperwork, and slept in my chair so I wouldn't miss the inspector's arrival. But sometime before dawn, a sound jolted me awake. Music. Faint, pulsing, electronic music. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my coat, shoved my boots on, and barreled out onto the porch. They had turned the DJ booth on the frozen lake, in the middle of the night, before anyone checked the ice safety, before any permits, before the inspector arrived. Bright neon lights pulsed in the darkness, reflecting off the ice like a rave in a snow globe. Speakers thumped bass into the frozen air. A generator hummed loudly behind the booth. Fear wasn't that the ice would crack this moment, though it could. My fear was that they were establishing usage, precedent. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. If she could show the inspector that the community had already been using the lake, she could argue that stopping them would cause hardship. I stormed across the ice toward the booth. My breath came out hot and furious. Near the generator stood 2 teenage boys, half asleep, tasked with babysitting the equipment. They looked cold, miserable, and deeply confused about life choices. "Turn that thing off," I shouted over the music. One boy jumped. We can't. Mrs. Monroe said it has to stay running all night to prevent freezing." "It's freezing outside," I snapped. "Everything is frozen." He shrugged helplessly. Sorry, I scanned the area. No Karen, no adults, just kids. Of course, she wouldn't risk being caught breaking the law herself. The generator chugged loudly, the neon lights buzzed, the bass thumped, and the ice, it didn't like any of it. Vibrations, especially deep, repeating ones, are dangerous for frozen surfaces. I marched behind the booth and pulled the generator plug. The sudden silence was deafening. The boys stared at me. Wide-eyed. She's gonna kill us, one whispered. She's gonna have to kill me first, I muttered. I left the booth dark and quiet and headed back to my cabin. Little did I know Karen was already waiting. We had permission, she insisted. No, you didn't actually, she said, lifting her chin. We do now. She reached into her coat and pulled out a sheet of paper. It had an official-looking header. For a moment my stomach tightened. Had she somehow convinced the county before the inspector arrived? I snatched the paper. It wasn't a permit, it was a petition. Signed by 63 residents of Snow Ridge Heights. Karen folded her arms smugly. Majority rules. This isn't a democracy, I said. This is my land. Not for long, she whispered. There are processes. There are pathways. The county likes community benefit. You've lived here too long without contributing. I stared at her. She smirked. Then I said the one sentence she didn't expect. The inspector is coming in the morning. Her expression cracked for the first time. What inspector? The Environmental Impact Office. Her mouth opened slightly. You filed a complaint. I filed an injunction. For a moment, the cold air froze between us. Then she spun around and stomped off the porch, muttering curses under her breath. I watched her disappear into the darkness. Tomorrow would decide everything. By the time first light crept across the lake, the temperature had dropped so low the air itself seemed brittle. The world felt paused, like the cold had pressed a giant mute button on everything except the moan of wind brushing against the tree line. I'd been awake since before dawn, pacing my cabin floor, checking my documents every few minutes, like a man preparing for trial. The inspector from the environmental office was supposed to arrive between 7 and 10, and knowing county workers, it could be anywhere in that vague window. I needed to be ready. But I wasn't the only one. Around 6:45, engines hummed on the ridge. Through the window, I saw a cluster of SUVs parked near the HOA Community Center. People bundled in heavy coats trudged down the slope, gathering near the lake like spectators assembling for a winter parade. Karen Monroe had summoned an audience. Of course she had. She stood out front in a white parka trimmed with faux wool fur, clipboard in hand, already rehearsing her victory speech. A tall man in a blazer, probably their hired consultant, hovered beside her. A photographer snapped pictures of the DJ booth sitting dark and dormant on the ice. They wanted evidence too. I stepped outside, pulling my collar tight. The cold hit hard, but adrenaline made my blood run hot. My boots crunched across the frost-hardened snow as I walked toward the lake. Halfway there, one of the HOA board members, a perpetually nervous woman who followed Karen like a shadow, approached me. "Morning, Mr. McAdler," she said, voice trembling with forced politeness. "Shelley, you really filed an injunction?" "Yes," she swallowed. "Karen says the county will side with the community. She says lakes fall under shared use regulations." "Not this one," I said. "This lake is fully enclosed by my property. It's private." Shelley gave me a helpless look. "I don't like conflict." "You're standing with the wrong people then." She winced, whispered sorry, and scampered back toward the group. By 7:30 a.m., a small crowd had assembled. HOA parents with travel mugs, kids with sleds tugging at their sleeves, volunteers holding signs, reading "Winter Bash for All" and "Share the Lake." I had one sign too, mine planted firmly in the snow: "Private property. Trespassing will be reported." A few residents eyed like it was a snake coiled in the snow. Karen strutted toward me with her chin high. "We're expecting our legal advisor," she said. "He'll make things clear." "No lawyer can rewrite a deed," I replied. She smiled coldly. "Today isn't about old papers. It's about community." "No," I said. "It's about land theft." Her eyes flashed with irritation, but before she could retort, an SUV rolled slowly down the access lane. It was old, county-issued, with a faded seal on the driver's door, and mud splashed across the tires. The crowd hushed. Even the kids froze mid-snowball. The inspector had arrived. He stepped out, a middle-aged man in a heavy jacket, clipboard under his arm, expression neutral but observant. He scanned the lake, the DJ booth, the stage frames, the freshly hammered stakes, and then finally, the people. Karen hurried to intercept him with a too bright smile. "Good morning," she chirped. "I'm Karen Monroe, president of the Snow Ridge Heights Homeowners Association. Thank you so much for coming." He offered a curt nod. "Inspector Halbrook." Before she could launch her script, he held up a hand. "Let's start by speaking to the property owner." Karen's smile froze like ice. I stepped forward. "Right here," I said. Halbrook nodded once. "You're Mr. McAdler, yes? You're the one who filed the injunction?" "Yes." He glanced at Karen. "I'll need to hear both sides." "Of course," she replied, voice sugary enough to rot teeth. "But it's really very simple, ma'am," he said firmly. "I'll speak with you after." Karen blinked, thrown off balance. For the first time, she realized this might not go her way. We walked toward my cabin where I had everything prepared on the dining table: land deeds, old photographs, county records, survey maps with highlighted boundary lines. I had spent hours organizing them chronologically so even a tired inspector could understand the lineage. Inside, the warmth from my wood stove wrapped the room in a cozy glow. Halbrook sat down, removed his gloves, and started flipping through the documents. He said, "Your claim is that the HOA is constructing an event site on your privately owned lake." "Yes." "And they did not obtain your permission?" "No. They'd been trespassing for weeks, hammering signs, drilling stakes, running generators." He glanced at a photo I'd taken of the DJ booth sitting on the ice. "What's this?" "Noise equipment. They left miners out there overnight to run it." Halbrook frowned. "On the ice?" "Yes." He scribbled notes. I watched his face carefully. He wasn't giving away much, but his growing list of bullet points looked promising. He tapped the deed. "This document shows your property includes the shoreline and extends 30 feet into the lake on all sides." "That's correct." "That means technically the entire lake is within your ownership." "Yes." He nodded slowly. Surprising the HOA didn't verify that they didn't want to. Halbrook studied the survey map again. "Everything appears legitimate. I'll confirm through the county database, but the burden is on them to prove otherwise." A flicker of hope warmed my chest. Then he closed the folder. "Now let's hear their side." Outside, the HOA crowd had grown restless. Karen stood at the center, rallying her troops with exaggerated concern. "They're trying to stop our kids from enjoying winter," she declared. "Mr. Mikadler has monopolized a natural resource. We need fairness." A few people nodded, though half of them looked uncomfortable, realizing how ridiculous the claim sounded. When the inspector approached, Karen snapped into her polished persona. "Inspector Halbrook, thank you again for taking the time. As you can see, this lake is vital to our winter traditions. Families skate here. Children learn here. Our community bonds here." "Ma'am," Halbrook interrupted, "are you aware this lake is entirely contained within Mr. Mikadell's property boundaries?" Karen blinked. "Well, the shoreline, yes, technically. But the water itself, the water is not a separate entity," he said plainly. "It is part of the land parcel." But lakes are communal assets," she insisted. "Everyone knows that." Halbrook pulled a printed statute from his folder. "Not private lakes. And the county recognizes this one as privately owned." The murmur through the crowd was immediate. Karen's face lost a shade of color, but she wasn't done. "We have community use precedent," she said quickly. "We've held winter events here for years." "Any evidence of that?" Halbrook asked. Karen hesitated. "Well, photos." The inspector raised an eyebrow. "Are those photos before or after you became HOA president?" She clamped her mouth shut. One father stepped forward timidly. "We used to skate here when it wasn't developed," he said. "But it was always considered Mr. Mikadler's. It stayed near the edge." Karen shot him a death glare strong enough to melt ice. Halbrook jotted another note. Then he walked toward the lake with purposeful steps. Everyone followed. He inspected the DJ booth, the stage frames, the stakes, the banners. He crouched near the ice, examining cracks formed from the previous night's vibration. Then he stood and turned to the crowd who authorized construction on the ice. Karen raised her chin. "The HOA board. Do you have engineering reports confirming weight limits?" She faltered. "We have community volunteers checking the thickness." "That is not an engineering report." "Well, the ice has always been fine, ma'am," he said sharply. "The generator running on this surface caused measurable vibration fractures. That is a major hazard. If this booth had collapsed through the ice last night, those boys could have died." Gasps rippled through the group. Karen's eyes widened. "What boys?" "One of your volunteers told me teens were left here overnight." Karen turned to her board. "Shelley, did you authorize minors to stay unsupervised?" Shelley's face went red. I thought adults were coming." "You told me to maintain presence." Halbrook held up a hand. "That is enough. I am issuing an immediate cease and desist on all activities conducted by the HOA on this lake. All structures must be removed. All materials cleared. No events may be held here without the explicit, written permission of the property owner." The crowd went silent. Karen's jaw dropped. "You're siding with him," she sputtered. "I am siding with the law," Halbrook replied. "This is unbelievable," she shouted. "You're ruining our whole winter festival." "Your festival is illegal," he said bluntly. "You have trespassed, endangered minors, violated multiple environmental codes, and attempted to misrepresent public land status." Karen's face turned bright red, fury radiating off her like steam. But Halbrook wasn't done. He handed her a citation and another dot and another. She grabbed them with stiff fingers, eyes burning holes in the paper. "These fines are outrageous," she cried. "You're lucky the county is not pursuing criminal charges," he said, when he turned to leave. The crowd parted for him like he was Moses splitting the sea. As Halbrook drove away, the HOA group stood awkwardly on the snow, unsure what to do next. Conversations buzzed in low, embarrassed murmurs. Karen, for once, was speechless. Then she locked eyes with me. I had never seen such cold determination. Not anger, not humiliation, something deeper, something dangerous. "You may have won today," she whispered, voice trembling. "But this isn't over." "It is," I said firmly. "The lake is mine." She gave a tight, chilling smile. "We'll see." And with that, she turned sharply and marched away. But she wasn't done. I knew it in my bones. That evening, as the sun burned orange across the horizon, the HOA workers reluctantly dismantled the DJ booth, packed away the stage frames, and pulled up every last stake from the ice. The neon tubes looked dull in the fading light. I watched from my porch as the last truck drove off for the first time in weeks. The lake felt like itself again, silent, steady. Home, I walked toward the fishing hole, knelt beside it, and dipped my gloved fingers into the freezing water. "Marianne," I whispered. "We did it." But just as the relief washed over me, a sound drifted from the ridge, a door slamming, voices raised, something metallic dropping. I looked up at the far edge of the HOA community center. Karen stood with a small group of board members. They were whispering aggressively, glancing toward my cabin, toward the lake, toward the property line. And then one of them unrolled a large blueprint across the hood of a car. Not for the festival, not for an event. This blueprint showed structures, fences, access paths, dark markings. They weren't giving up. They were planning something bigger, something permanent. The real battle had just begun. Night barely settled over the valley when the cabin's old generator began rumbling again, the sound rolling through the trees like distant thunder. The place felt different tonight, more tense, more alert, like the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. After everything that had unfolded in the past few hours, I wasn't sure if I should trust the silence or be preparing for the next storm. Inside, Joanna was pacing back and forth across the wooden floor, her boots tapping in quick, irritated beats. She kept running her fingers through her hair, muttering under her breath about the cops, the fake inspections, and the way Janice always seemed to slip away from consequences like she was coated in grease. "She's planning something," Joanna said finally, stopping near the window and pushing the curtain aside just enough to glance outside. "I know that woman. When she retreats, she's just rearranging her claws." I leaned back against the counter, arms folded. "I don't doubt it. But we can't chase shadows. We need evidence. Real, solid, undeniable evidence that she's been messing with the grid and using my property." Joanna huffed. "I'm telling you, the buried cable behind your cabin is only part of her setup. She's running a whole operation, and the sooner we uncover it, the sooner we shut her down." She wasn't wrong, but we had already been outside twice tonight, checking the lines, making sure the breaker hadn't been tampered with. Each time, I half expected to catch someone out there cutting another path through my land. The generator sputtered for a moment, then steadied. "See," Joanna said, "it's adjusting to extra load. That means someone's pulling from it again." I frowned. That shouldn't be possible. I disconnected everything that wasn't mine. "Unless she tapped into another point," Joanna replied, and knowing her, she definitely did. Before I could respond, a loud crack echoed outside like a branch snapping under heavy weight. We both froze. Joanna's eyes narrowed instantly. She grabbed her flashlight from the table, clicked it on, and motioned for me to follow. We stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under our feet. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the pine scent of the forest. The moon hung just above the treetops, glowing like a pale spotlight. Somewhere in the distance, an owl cried out. "Left side," Joanna whispered, "toward the ridge trail." We moved quietly, boots sinking into the soft ground. The sound came again, closer this time. A rustle, a shuffle, then the unmistakable scrape of something metallic against wood. Joanna raised her light, sweeping it across the trees, and there she was, Janice Weller, crouched beside the breaker box near the rear of the cabin, her hands deep inside the wiring, flashlight clamped between her teeth. Joanna's reaction was instant. "Oh, hell no," she snapped, marching forward. Janice shot upright like she'd been electrocuted. The flashlight fell from her mouth and landed in the dirt with a thud. I was checking the grid," Janice sputtered. "It's a safety hazard. I received a complaint." "No one complains to you," Joanna barked. "You're not HOA president anymore. You don't even live here legally." I stepped beside them. "Get away from my property, Janice." She tried smoothing her sweater, her hands trembling. "This is all a misunderstanding." "I was only a misunderstanding. Doesn't involve stealing electricity," I said. Janice's expression twisted, a mixture of anger and desperation. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," Joanna shot back. "We found your hidden cable, and now you're tampering with his system again. That's a felony." "Please," Janice scoffed. "Like you two would know anything about real law." Joanna grinned coldly, crossing her arms. "Actually, I do. And trust me, once my friend sends me the report he's working on, you won't be able to charm your way out of anything." Janice stiffened. "What report?" "The one that proves you've been siphoning power for months." For the first time, Janice's confidence completely cracked. Her eyes widened. Her breathing quickened. She scanned the forest like a cornered animal looking for escape. You can't prove that," she whispered. "We can," I said. "And we will." Suddenly, Janice lunged toward the wiring again, trying to yank something loose. Joanna grabbed her wrist, twisting her arm gently but firmly behind her back. "Don't," Joanna warned. Unless you want to walk into the sheriff's office with extra charges. Janice struggled like a furious cat. Let go of me. I was protecting the neighborhood. You don't understand. You're right, Joanna said. I don't understand how a grown woman can cause this much drama over electric bills she doesn't want to pay. I grabbed Janice's other arm as she tried to swing at Joanna. Stop, enough. You're trespassing, you're tampering, and you're caught. Janice let out a screech, half rage, half panic. You think you can stop me? You think you can sabotage everything I've built? I run this place. You ran it, I corrected. Past tense. Joanna started pulling Janice away from the breaker box. Come on, we're taking you inside until we figure out what to do with you. But Janice twisted suddenly, slipping free with a surprising burst of strength. She bolted toward the trees, branches snapping under her feet. Great, Joanna muttered. She's running again. Let her go, I said after a moment. The more she panics, the more mistakes she'll make. Joanna exhaled slowly. You're not wrong, but she's like a loose grenade with a pin out. We walked back toward the cabin. The generator hummed steadily again, almost as if mocking the chaos around us inside. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Joanna dropped into the nearest chair, rubbing her temples. We need a plan, she said. A proper one. We'll get her, I replied. She's too sloppy now. She'll slip. Joanna nodded. And when she does, I want to be there. But before either of us could figure out the next move, headlights appeared in the distance. A vehicle was driving up the mountain road. Slow, steady, and familiar. Joanna leaned forward, squinting. Is that? Yes, I said quietly. That's her car. Janice had returned, but she wasn't alone. Two figures stepped out with her. One held a clipboard. The other wore a reflective vest and had a radio clipped to his shoulder. Joanna's jaw dropped. You have got to be kidding me. She brought fake inspectors. My pulse kicked up. The night wasn't over, not even close. The tires crunched softly over the gravel as the SUV rolled to a stop in front of the cabin. Its headlights cut through the darkness, washing over the porch and the surrounding trees like a pair of giant, unblinking eyes. The forest, usually calm and quiet by this hour, suddenly felt crowded, alert, like every pine tree was leaning in to listen. Joanna stood beside me, arms crossed, shoulders tense. She actually did it, she muttered. She brought backup, fake backup, but still. Janice stepped out of the driver's seat first, straightening her cardigan and smoothing her hair as if she were about to walk into a town council meeting. Her face held that old smug expression she always wore whenever she thought she had outsmarted someone. Behind her, the two men walked around the SUV. One was tall and thin, clutching a thick clipboard like it was a badge of authority. The other was heavyset, wearing a reflective vest and a radio clipped to his belt, though there was something suspiciously toy-like about the radio's antenna. Joanna whispered, "Dollar Store Enforcement Squad." I almost laughed, but the situation wasn't funny at all. Not anymore. Janice marched right up to us like she owned the entire mountain. There's been a formal complaint, she announced, chin lifted high. A very serious one about illegal usage of county power sources. I stared at her flatly. You filed the complaint yourself. She blinked rapidly, pretending to be shocked. I would never. The community has concerns. What community? Joanna shot back. This isn't an HOA neighborhood. It's the mountains. There are bears, not block meetings. Janice ignored her completely and motioned toward the men behind her. These are licensed field inspectors, she said dramatically. They're here to conduct an urgent evaluation. The tall man with the clipboard cleared his throat. Yes, urgent evaluation. The other man just nodded as if his neck springs were rusty. Joanna whispered to me, I bet if I ask for their certification, they'll hand me a pizza coupon. Janice stepped up closer, lowering her voice like she was about to reveal some grand conspiracy. And if you refuse inspection, she said, I will be forced to notify the sheriff that you're interfering with county operations. That's rich, I said, considering you called the sheriff on me earlier for catching you stealing electricity. Janice smiled sweetly, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. Oh, I think the sheriff will understand once he hears the full story. Joanna took a step forward, planting herself between Janice and me. Enough games. These men are not county inspectors. They don't have badges. They don't have ID, and they certainly don't have jurisdiction on private land at midnight. The clipboard guy scrambled through his papers. Where have forms? Joanna held up her hand, stopping him cold. Forms aren't credentials. Janice's voice climbed into that familiar shrill pitch. You cannot deny a safety inspection. This cabin is drawing irregular voltages. You caused the irregular voltages, I snapped. You've been tapping into my lines for months. Janice gasped dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest like I'd slapped her. How dare you accuse me? Oh, please. Joanna interrupted. You were literally caught at the breaker box an hour ago. The heavyset man adjusted his vest. Ma'am, we need to check the wiring. Joanna narrowed her eyes. And who exactly do you work for? He froze, then pointed to the reflective vest. This, I nearly snorted. The vest didn't even have a logo. Clipboard guy jumped in. We're outsourced by Mountain Region Services. That company doesn't exist, Joanna said. Clipboard guy glanced at Janice for help. Janice's smile tightened. We're wasting time. Step aside. No, I said. This is private property. You're trespassing. All of you. Janice's mask finally cracked. You think you can push me around? You think you can embarrass me? Everything on this mountain goes through me. I built this community. You built chaos. Joanna fired back. And tonight you're adding fraud to your collection. The air grew tense, heavy like the moment before lightning hits. Janice stepped closer to closing in until her nose almost touched mine. If you don't cooperate, she whispered, this cabin will be condemned again. Permanently. Joanna exploded. Try it. I dare you. Before Janice could find another excuse to argue, a loud rustling broke through the trees behind us. All four of us turned at the same time. A flashlight beam swung through the darkness. Then another. Voices echoed up the road. Real voices, real deputies. Joanna cursed under her breath. Oh great, perfect timing. Janice, on the other hand, looked thrilled. Wonderful, she declared loudly. The sheriff must have taken my report seriously. Two sheriff's deputies stepped out from the tree line, beams cutting through the shadows. One of them I recognized, Deputy Mills, the same man who earlier had apologized for the mix-up with Janice's fake complaint. He did not look amused now. What exactly is going on here? He asked, stopping near the porch. Before I could open my mouth, Janice jumped in like a contestant buzzing in for a game show. Officers, thank goodness. These two have been manipulating the county power lines and threatening my inspectors. Joanna blinked. You're what? Deputy Mills eyed the men with Janice. Inspectors. Funny, I haven't seen either of you before. Can I see your county ID? Clipboard man swallowed. Vest man patted his pockets. I forgot mine. Mills frowned. Forgot your credentials. On an official intervention at night. Clipboard guy pointed at Janice helplessly. She hired us. The words echoed through the clearing. Janice's face froze. Joanna burst out laughing. There it is. Deputy Mills let out a tired sigh. Ma'am, you hired fake inspectors. I did not. Janice shrieked. They are professionals. Vest man shrugged. She paid cash. Wanted us to look official. That said it was for HOA enforcement. You're not HOA anymore, Mills reminded her. His partner stepped forward. Ma'am, were you attempting to impersonate county officials? Janice's voice cracked. No, this is all a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect the community. Joanna stepped up beside the deputies. She was trying to condemn his cabin again because she got caught tapping into his power. One incident has nothing to do with the other, Janice argued. It has everything to do with it, I said. She's been trespassing, stealing electricity, filing false complaints, and now bringing fake enforcement to intimidate us. Deputy Mills pinched the bridge of his nose. Janice. Her lower lip trembled. This is harassment. I'm being targeted. Everyone is against me. Joanna folded her arms. Nobody targeted you. You caused all of this. For the last time, Mills said, you do not have any authority here. None. You cannot inspect, condemn, report, or enforce anything, and hiring fake inspectors. His partner added, that alone could get you into serious trouble. Janice's eyes began darting in every direction, searching desperately for an escape route, the same way she did earlier when she ran into the trees. But this time, she didn't run. She snapped. Completely. I did what I had to do. She screamed. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The HOA may be gone, but the standards must remain. If I don't enforce them, who will? This mountain will fall apart. Joanna whispered. She's actually gone off the cliff. The deputies exchanged looks. Deputy Mills stepped toward her calmly. Janice, I'm asking you nicely, stop resisting the situation. Let us talk this through. No, she yelled. I won't let you ruin everything. And then, in one wild, unpredictable moment, she grabbed the clipboard from the fake inspector's hands and swung it at Mills. The scene erupted instantly. Joanna lunged forward to stop her. The deputies moved in. The fake inspectors. They backed away with their hands raised like they were watching a zoo animal break out of its cage. And Janice, she fought. Chaotic, kicking, screaming, trying to claw her way out of the deputy's hold. Let me go. Let me go. For someone who hates drama, Joanna muttered while helping restrain her. You sure create a lot of it. Within seconds, Mills managed to cuff Janice's wrists. She thrashed once more before finally collapsing to her knees, sobbing and furious all at the same time. You're all ungrateful. She choked out. I kept this place running. I made the rules. I kept everyone safe. No, Joanna said softly. You kept everyone scared. Janice quieted. Just for a moment. Then she whispered, you'll regret this. And with that, the deputies guided her toward their vehicle. The fake inspectors stood awkwardly near the SUV. Mills gestured to them. We'll need statements from both of you. Don't leave. Clipboard guy gulped. Yes, sir. Joanna exhaled heavily, rubbing her forehead. I swear, every time she shows up I lose 3 years of my life. I looked toward the sheriff's car where Janice was being placed inside. That was the biggest stunt she's pulled yet. Joanna nodded, and something tells me it's not her last. I didn't know it then, but she was right. The night wasn't over, and neither was Janice. The sheriff's car pulled away slowly. its red-blue lights flashing through the trees like distant lightning. For the first time all night, the mountain felt still again, the kind of quiet that settles after a storm, fragile, uncertain, but finally breathable. Joanna folded her arms as she watched the car disappear down the winding road. "I'm not gonna lie," she said. "I thought she was going to escape again. She's slippery like ice on stairs." "Same," I admitted. "But this time, I think reality finally caught up with her." "Yeah," Joanna said. Deputy Mills looked done with her nonsense. Behind us, the fake inspectors stood awkwardly beside their SUV. Clipboard guy kept adjusting his glasses like they were about to fall off. Vest man looked like he wanted to dissolve into the forest and pretend none of this had ever happened. Deputy Mills's partner walked over to them. "Gentlemen, we need your statements. And your real names." Vest man raised a timid hand. "Do we, get in trouble for this?" "That depends," the deputy said. "Tell the truth, and you'll likely walk out with a warning." Clipboard guy nodded rapidly. "Truth sounds great. I love truth." Joanna leaned toward me. "They're so harmless, it's almost sweet." I exhaled, finally feeling some weight lift off my shoulders. "Let's head inside. It's freezing." We returned to the cabin. The door creaked behind us as we stepped inside, the warmth wrapping around us like a blanket. For a moment, we just stood there exhausted, mentally drained, but relieved. Joanna dropped onto the couch,